Hi and welcome to the React.js Fundamentals session. So in this session, I talked about how React works and how React interacts with server, how do we create, what are the different types of components in React. The first point that I wanted to talk about is what is the web app architecture. I needed to cover that and at least a pictorial representation of how everything we are learning fits in the application development. In one slide, I wanted to explain that architecture we are going to create to develop an application, and then why we need React and how React works. And then we will understand why do we need to learn the components the way they are. And also, we will look into the components, events, and props. Consider these are different types of devices that these days customers use or users use. And in the web application world, we call these devices, we call them clients. Okay. And usually what we do, we go to a website and visit some websites and get some information or learn something or do something and share something. Everything happens, all these things we do, everything happens through a request and response architecture. So the HTTP hypertext transfer protocol has an architecture of request and response. Okay. So, okay, let's say this is a web server and the each web server will be backed up by some kind of database. If it is a web app, there is definitely need of a database. And if a request reaches to a server, this request will be processed based on, and the processing output will be saved to database or any sort of data operation to be done will be done, and then the result of that operation will be sent back to the client. So that is the whole life cycle of a particular request. So you start with a request, your server will analyze that request, and finally that entire operation result will be given back to the client so that he could see. Like, let's just say that you have deleted a photo in your Facebook. So you raise a request saying that the photo has to be deleted. This is the photo information. And you go to the media server and you delete that media, and you also delete a record of that from the DB, and then you'll send a message that this has been deleted, and UI can hide that information from then on that point. So that's how the entire life cycle is, and it goes on. There could be different types of requests like delete or update, and we have seen them. So where does the React fit? React is a client-side library. So with using React, you will develop web apps. These web apps, you develop a website, you host a web app, you host it, and if a user comes to your website, the first thing that he is going to load is the React. And React knows, or React should be configured to understand what user trying to say or do, and then talk to the designated server that you will say that, hey React, this is how you should render, these are all your components, and if user does something or trying to save that, you need to contact this server. So you will define every instruction in the React is raising requests through a REST endpoint, sending some JSON information to save, create, read, or update, or delete. And you in the past sessions, in the past homeworks, you created those servers and you actually processed those requests and saved that information and deleted or updated the record. I know you did, and you are connecting the dot here. And finally, you have the MongoDB to kind of consume that data, or delete the data or update the data. Node.js or this web server. So if I say here is your view, here is your server, that means controller, view, this is your model. Okay, so your model is here, your controller is here, your view is here. So that's how you should understand the entire architecture. Okay, so we're learning MongoDB, that is a NoSQL database, and saves the information in JSON format. More or less it looks like JSON. So that is MongoDB. And we had learned Express, which will help you to create a web application or endpoint or anything. And React.js, We're learning React.js to build user interfaces. And we already know Node.js is a runtime that will help you to run the Express.js framework or any other packages or any other JavaScript code or module. The entire lifecycle has been built using this stack. So that's why we call it as MERN stack. So if I highlight, the first letter of each technology becoming MERN stack. MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js. That is MERN stack. So this is the stack that all you need is this stack to create a web application and deploy and serve your customers. So what is React? We know what is React now. React is a library to build. So you can create user interface using React. And that knows how to contact the web server, and web server knows how to handle your data. Good. The whole life cycle is clear. Now, React.js is basically designed, or React.js library will help you to create components. And what is a component and why do you need to create components, basically? So let's assume this is your web layout, okay? And you will definitely have different portions in the website, right? You will have header, you will have a logo, you will have your menu. So each of these pieces are like, individual pieces. So you can create a menu or you can create a logo, but you need not, not necessarily have it in the header. This logo, you can have it in the footer or a header or anywhere. Each of the HTML tag is individual tag, but you kind of cramp them or, put inside, beside, and you're, making an entire website. So similar like HTML tags, you're going to create different components, and you're going to kind of style those components or configure those components to do a specific job. Okay, you might need a specific job repeated on multiple times on the page. For example, if your site is a particular e-commerce site, okay, so if user comes to home page and searches for something, there is a product thumbnail. Whatever the e-commerce site you go, if you see it, the result of your search, you'll see all of the products listed as in the same format. Okay, just because there are hundreds of products listed down, that doesn't mean that each product has its own HTML snippet, right? You will create one single snippet and you will define the behavior of that snippet, and you will say, here you load the image, here you load the color options, here you load the title, here you load the price, and you will change the information, and pretty much the same component repeated 100 other times and shows 100 other product. And if you end up creating HTML for each of the product that you have on your website, you might end up creating 5,000 6,000 pages. You wouldn't want that. You want one single snippet that will do the job, and you want to repeat that again and again, and you want to manage that very quickly, and you want to repeat that, and you want to show the information. All of them boil down to one thing, that is React components. You need to learn how to create React component better, and then you'll figure out how do you club all those things together and make a bigger website. So all you need to figure out is to learn to make that one smaller thing better and more configurable. Okay, so how does that entire thing fits? So as we have seen in the last session, there is a root element on the index file. Okay, and React actually starts from there. React starts creating the virtual DOM on the root element, and the app component or any of the first component that you create will become a child component to that root. In fact, any component that is placed inside other component will have a parent-child relation. So you need to understand this terminology. When I say sibling, okay, the components that are highlighted in red, okay, are siblings. So they are actually aligned side by side. Okay, if they are aligned side by side. If you have a component inside the component and inside the component and then inside the component, you should say that they are the nested components. Some may be children, some may be parent, but if you are addressing a group of components, you should say they are nested component cluster. So the key takeaways from this past few slides are like, the components are very tiny pieces of your bigger architecture. So let's say if you're creating a button, go ahead and create a component. It's not like, I pick this bunch of HTML, I make it as one component. So that's not going to, that's not the ideal way. The ideal way is to, if you're creating one small button or a text field or anything, you create a component and configure that logic, because you want to behave that one text field unique across your application. You don't want somebody writing something, somebody writing something. If you're rendering a input element, that should behave the same way, the unique way of your way of behavior to that one component, and it should work that way. So we have seen what is the nested ones, what is sibling. So what is the standard way of creating a web app? If you wanted to create something on web, the standard way that we have seen is first create this file, and then create this file, and then create fish file. Write the HTML here, okay, then style here, and add some behavior here, right? But in the React, it's not going to be the same. All of these, okay, we use JS files. So JSX, JavaScript, XML. React simplified of writing these individual components. Basically, JSX is a different format that React can understand and render HTML, CSS, JavaScript out of that JSX. But JSX, React has actually built around another interpreter to interpret that JSX and able to create native applications for Android and iOS. So you create a new element altogether, and keeping the similarities between CSS and JavaScript and HTML, and it is entirely a new set of component. And if this JSX defines that this should be the height and width and style, I can either render HTML, I can either render some native code for some other applications, right? Like you get the benefit of writing once and using different platforms. So that's the benefit that you get out of using JSX. So you can write it once and use in many places. And moreover, if you write some HTML and CSS, and if you wanted to see what's wrong with it, you have to go to a browser and then come back to and address that, right? But React ways, if you write your HTML, CSS in JSX way, whenever you are saving it or trying to compile it, you could see that error right in the console and directly go to that error and fix it. You don't have to go through an hassle of finding it on the web page, coming back to your code, finding in the same place, and then fixing it. Okay. In React, you can create components with two different types. One, class-based components, and the other is functional components. Class components and functional components. You need to name your function so that your component will also be referred with the same name. And then whatever coming into that component from outside, like if some other component from parent level wants to send some information to you, you can access through the props object. Okay. And then the entire thing that we have here is JSX, and you can use this props, interpolate, or kind of render that information coming from parent components right in the current component. So those are the three important aspects for functional components. The class component way, you don't have to depend on entirely on the props. You can define your component data or component model, whatever the data that you needed to have in this component, like empty data for a form or anything, anything of that sort, you can have it in. But the library developers will recommend you to use functional components over class components. My emphasis on creating class-based components will be very less in this training, because this is not recommended to use, and it is only recommended to use the functional components heavily. Okay, React website. And how do we create a React app? We go to the section, we install a package called create React app, or we can simply say npx create React app. And if we say my app, instead of saying my app, today say React 103. Okay. So I'm creating a project called React 103. I already have the create React app package already locally installed. So it's not installing, it's directly started creating a project. Okay. So all these are happening through Node runtime environment because NPX is installing a Node package called create React app, and create React app package does have a knowledge of creating or the scaffolding, the basic structure of React, how it should be and all are actually configured inside create React app. It just copies the standard template of React and installs the dependencies that are needed for React. Again, after all, React is composed of all different packages, right? Yeah, if I go into the app that I just created, cd React 103, okay, and if I open this and the code, so I type this command code, so this might be not visible to you so much. I should have increased the size of this terminal. Create React app has created a project scaffolding of React and installed all the dependencies, as giving me a couple of hints to run this website and work with this project. But anyways, I'm going to run you through. So I went inside that folder and I entered this command called code space dot. So that means open this present working directory of this React 103 in a Visual Studio Code. That's what I did. So if you want to follow me, so that's what you can do. All the dependencies that you need are actually listed here. So what all you need to run your web application or React application, these are all the dependencies React has, and these are all the scripts that you need to run this React app. Here, the dependencies that are noted here are kind of downloaded to Node.js, and the assets, your images, your icons, or any other static asset that you need for your website is in the folder called public, and this is where your React app actually starts. Okay. So React allows you to create the root element for that React. That happens here. Okay. Then after, it will actually access the React root element in the index. So let's go to the index file, the base file that we needed to render to React. So that is this element ID. There is a div tag with the ID of root. You can replace this div tag with some other, semantic tag like section or article. It will still work. Okay. So it will find an element with this ID of root in the index. If you see, it's trying to find an element by ID of root. So it's going to land up here. So this is becoming your root website. So root element, and then the index file has started rendering an app component. The app component will again rendering some of our other components or other JSX. And each of these component will again render some other complex. So just the way we looked in our PPT, so from the root to the child, it'll compose, the React application will be composition of all the small components. Okay, let me run the React app first. So how can you run the React app and see the preview of this code that is already copied? npm run start. So we have the CSS written in CSS file, but if you want, you can write in the same file as well. But Ganesh, a while back you said you write JavaScript, HTML, everything in one file. But yes, you can write, and also you can write. CSS is slightly different, and it's better to write CSS in CSS file. That's the reason you see this is recommended. But yes, you can write your CSS here itself. Okay. So this is a typical class component example. I don't want to, already a function, app, you say a return statement, and in the return statement, you will have all the JSX that you need. Here you will get your props. If you say props, if you name your, props, you will get your props, printed. And there is an error already because you can't print the props as is. So your questions will be, this is not something that you want to do. You want to access something inside the props. So there is nothing in the props for now. So the typical architecture of this function component is this. And if you wanted to send some information, from the index. This is the parent element. App name is equals to my React app. So this becomes a property for this component. Okay, the attribute will become a property for this component, and that property that you can access like this. Props dot, what is the name that you have given here? App name. This you should be able to render my React app. If I change it, you will see the same reflected here. So anything that you want to send from here will actually be retrieved by this props object, and everything that you have here on this particular component as an attribute and at its value will be stored on the props, and you can access it. So how can I change this, function component? How can I write the same in the class-based component? Okay. So you, instead of using a function attribute, function keyword, you will use a class keyword. And the name of this, component can be the same. And here you should import the component class of React. Okay. And then you should say extends to component. Okay. And this is classes doesn't have the expression, function expression here. You will define the class. This is not the class syntax. The actual class syntax is this. You will have class keyword, the name of the class. If you wanted to extend this class to some other class, like if you wanted to make, a child, this class as a child of some other class, you will say extends to this class, and the return statement is no longer valid in the class component. You need to make that return statement or move that return statement inside the render function. Okay. So the props are, that's a different area. So first, the return statement that you just had here in the function component on the top level is that has to be moved inside the render function. And now the props are not directly accessible because this is no longer a property that is sent to a function. This is actually now part of the scope of that particular component. If you save this, and now you see the exact same result with the class component architecture. Okay. So what is the difference between this and this? I revert it back. We didn't add anything here. Okay. We have these two syntaxes. Okay. Here, this particular component has a scope of its own context. So everything you send or want to create will get created on this component. In the case of functions, you don't have this here. Okay. So these functions are stateless. There is no state to it. And there is no this, valid this object or ensured that this will be available to its context scope or scope, sorry. So that's a major difference between the class component and function component. Okay. Since the introduction of a simple or a library called hooks, the function components have gained the popularity because they are very plain, very simple to create, very simple to manage and extend. And the need for the scope of this component has got drastically reduced. So the need of, when there is no need for something, there's no point there's no point to go to that extent and have that in the code. So I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. You don't need to you just learned it and you keep practice of this particular component, style. We will talk about how to use state inside the component, but for now, and it is recommended to use functional components over the class-based components in this session. Okay, let's understand let's create another component like header .js, and let's see the difference between, and let's create a functional component in this case, function header. I get confused, I get carried away. Header component, and then say return, and then say return empty component, and say dev, and then h1. This is header, and finally I want to format this document and then export default header. Okay, this is typical class component, and I wanted to import here. It's not getting imported, huh? Why? Good. So how do you render a component? You'll have a self-closed tag. Okay, and let's go. This is my header, but usually header will come here. Okay, so I have two components now. One is header, the other one is app. This is a functional component example, and this is a class-based component example. So how can you use the props object in both of these examples? So if I come here on the header, I'll say company or org name. I wanted to render the organization name. The name is Sibling Training Corp. Okay, I wanted to use this. So you either have a destructuring expression there and have the same name here like this, and you can print this same like this in the functional component that we have seen already. So that's being rendered here. Or you can simply have, I don't want to destructure it. Everything that is coming to this component can be stored in the object called props. And then I wanted to refer the prop and put a dot notation and refer the training. So there's no change. But again, in the class-based component, you have seen this is not the case. Directly you cannot access like this. These props are by default that's stored on this context. This is a context of the particular component. This is the scope, and this is being directly propagated to this scope, and all the props are accessible. The one thing that doesn't have this component and the class components have is the constructor function. Okay. So we know what is a constructor function. Constructor function is a function that executes when a particular instance of this particular class got or used. So if this class is being used, if this component is being used, this is the method that is going to run first. But in the case of functional component, the entire function will run once and the result will be returned. So since you're extending this function to have the same properties of component, so if I go inside the component and you could see what is having inside component, there are so many things. This is extending to a component object of React. And if you at all you have a constructor object on this app component, you need to call super. This method will make sure that the components constructor class is also being called. What is the need of this super class? If your constructor is running, there are certain properties that needs to be inherited from the component since you're extending this app from this component. So you need to call this super. So without super method calling in your constructor, you will run into compile time errors. I already have a warning, but this warning says useless constructor. Yes, there is no use for now. We have seen the usage of props, but what is the use of state? Okay, this dot state equal to, you can decide a particular variable set that you wanted to use in this component. Okay, in this component, in this app component. So I don't want to call this as app now. I wanted to call it as. So now I just wanted to rename it and I imported it as app. I no longer wanted name to be app. I just wanted to change the counter. Yes. Everything is changed to counter, but have I misspelled it? Okay, this is a used variable, I know. So don't make the fuss. One warning, useless. So I wanted to create a variable called count is, and I just wanted to set it to default to 1. So this is how you can create a state inside a component. So why do I need it to create a state? You can use that state, print that this dot state dot count. You can access that property and print it in. So let me restart it. Okay, no longer errors. That's restart issue. I used to have this as a different component. So this counter component now does have a state. Inside the state, I have different variable. I can create different variable set, but for now I have a property on this state. I have a property called count, and I can access that particular count property like this. Okay. So app.cs is imported and I wanted to remove everything. Last name counter. I just wanted to have it bigger so you guys can see. So I'm just styling it. Variant, weight, bold, padding, px1. Okay. And I can have another button, but here I want you to observe one thing, one important thing. I wanted to increase this counter time and again. If I save it, I run into issues because JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing stack. And did you want the JSX frame? Okay. So always remember, you cannot create two sibling elements without a parent. So if you are returning something, you always make sure that you wrap these things inside a specific div. The returning statement, or we should only return one element, and you can contain all those elements in one element. So that's what the error that you saw there. And I wanted to use class name container. I just wanted to center this. So I can say container text align, enter. Yeah, everything is now in center. Now I have this button. Okay. This is the state. I wanted to update this statement whenever I wanted to increase it. You can do that. Okay. How can we do that? You need to access that script. So in the class component, you can create a function, okay, like handle click like this. and refer this like this. Okay. And whenever you click that method, I just wanted to log something. I just tied this event to this method. And as I said, you can access the scope of this component through the through the this keyword. And everything else that you create in the JavaScript section, this is the JSX section of the component. Always remember, whatever inside the render of this function component, this is JSX section, and outside of render function is all JavaScript section. Any JavaScript that you write is going to be the valid thing. Okay. And whenever I click this, I just wanted to this dot state dot counter count is equals to plus equals to 1. Okay. So if you see, state cannot, cannot be updated directly because this is protected from mutation. You cannot mutate a particular statement inside state directly like this. Okay. So how can I update this state? Okay. How can I update this state? You can update this state with a method called this dot set state. Set state, call this function and send in the variables that you wanted to update. I wanted to update the count. Okay. And I wanted to update it. So I take in the first count that, this dot state dot count plus 1. Whatever it is there, just take in the state, the current value, add 1 and save it into the state. So with this help of this function, the set state function, you can increase it. So there is a problem now that cannot read the properties of states, cannot read the properties of state. Why? Oh, yeah, sorry. I got it. So here I need to bind it. Yeah, because this scope is missing. Yeah, I got it. So basically here, I'm with direct reference here, with this direct reference like this, I'm losing the scope of it. Otherwise, I have to say this dot bind. So yeah, I don't want to go that route now and confuse everybody with bind statement. Upon clicking, I just wanted to call this anonymous function, which will not change the scope of that component. And then I want to call this. I think at this point of time, I will be able to run. Thanks for help, Krishna. I think.
Yeah, that I read it long ago, like years back.
I made a mistake. Yeah, I should have known. Yeah, thanks for that. So you can continue to increase it. And this hassle of creating a state, creating this function and going there and preserving the state is no longer needed with hooks. You can do the same with hooks in the function component. But basically, the difference between, I wanted to talk about the differences between a state and properties, majorly. So a state is like, a function, a particular, a variable that is created inside a function. Like if you are writing a function and if you wanted to create a variable and store something in it and later use in the same function, it's like state. So we are doing the same. We are creating the state and using it in many places in the same component. But props, on the other hand, will be coming from outside, like we send some of the properties sometimes to some other functions, right? So you should never get confused between these two things. State is something that you create inside the function, and a state is a kind of a function, a variable inside the function. A prop is something that a parameter to a function. You send a parameter to a function, right? So that's how you should differentiate both. Okay. And a properties are also immutable. Like, what do I mean by that? I say props dot org name is a valid free. So you cannot say that, there's this new org name. Okay. And if I go, I see an error. So basically, what is the meaning of this error is properties are immutable. What is immutable statement? It's sounding interesting. So you cannot change it. So immutable means that you cannot change it once it is defined. And on the other hand, states with the state you can mutate, but with the help of set state method. Okay. And state variables also you cannot directly mutate, but through a function. So those are all the major differences between these two things. So in the recent, days, the introduction of hooks of this sort, const counter, set counter is equals to use state array. Okay, counter set counter, initial state is 1, usage needs to be imported. Why this? So you'll import it like this, import use state from, where do we import it from? React. Okay, and if you use the counter is set counter is never, of course I know, never used. Okay, there's a problem. What is the problem? Okay, I still trying to update property. So the counter is simple. So this is the way of state, and what we are looking now is the way of hooks. So as I said, this is the old way of doing, and the current way of doing is this. Okay, you write a button, increment. I'm trying to write the same with hooks. On click, so you write a function, anonymous function. Why there is a token error? Did I messed up? Okay. Set counter. Okay. So we spread that old variable. So we use counter +1. So when you have this much simplicity, would you be going to this extent to do something? So that was a question triggered by many other people. So this function components used to not, does not have a state, but since the introduction of hooks, which are serving the function of creating a state for these function components, the function components are become quite popular these days.